Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I'm Andrea of European Things at the Museum, and I'm here with two distinguished panelists, Martha Tedeschi, who is the Deputy Director for Art and Research at the Art Institute of Chicago, and Sandra Lang, who is the Director and Associate Faculty at the Visual Arts Administration MA program of the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development at NYU. So it's great to be here. It's great to be talking about this wonderful new program of the AAMC of mentoring colleagues in the curatorial professions. And today we're going to be specifically addressing what one needs to do to be the most efficacious mentor possible. We thought that we would start out by each very briefly describing the kind of mentoring experiences that we've had. So I will start off, and then Martha will jump in, and then Sandra. I've had the pleasure of mentoring people of very different ages and at different points in their career. A notable example of that being when I was at the Center for Curatorial Leadership, in fact, with Martha, and had the opportunity to mentor a high school student with whom I'm still in contact, and I think that was an experience that enriched both of our lives. But I'll focus instead on saying that I have worked over the years with a number of people who have come to my department as curatorial assistants or assistants on specific projects and have fallen into mentoring experiences with them. And I wish I could have had a webinar like this before I got into those kind of relationships, because I could have been perhaps more thoughtful about it and will be more thoughtful in the future after this experience. Martha, how about you? I know you've had a lot of experience mentoring younger colleagues.
Well, mostly because of how many years I've been at this. My current position as Deputy Director is only 2 years old. So the majority of my mentoring experience, like yours, Andrea, has been as a curator. In my case, here at the Art Institute in the Department of Prints and Drawings. About 25 years ago, I founded an internship program in prints and drawings, which has become sort of more and more established over the years, to the point where we now have a class of about 7 interns every semester, including in the summer. So I think I'm connected to something like 400 former interns on LinkedIn right now.
Wow.
That to be a great way to stay in touch with them all, because it tells me when they all get a new job or something. Mm-hmm. So my early experience and my greatest years of experience has really been in mentoring undergraduate and graduate students who are already interested in curatorial careers and have sought out that kind of work experience. More recently, as a senior curator in the museum, and then as the president of my professional organization, the Print Council of America, and then finally, very recently, as deputy director, I've been called on by colleagues who are already in their curatorial careers, but who may find themselves at a crossroads, may feel stuck. And at this point, I'm talking really about colleagues in-house, but also in the field. Mm-hmm. In many cases, I think people who do feel stuck in their own administrations find it helpful to talk to somebody at another museum. And so I've done a fair amount of that, but very informally, over the past years, particularly since I became president of the Print Council of America in 2009. So I'd say I have both internal and external mentoring experience, mostly with students, but more recently also with, I would say, mostly junior and mid-level mm-hmm. curators, but in my role as deputy directors, even department heads from time to time.
Great, great. This will be very helpful to our listeners, who will see the incredible range of mentoring that you've done. And Sandra?
Yes, I think I've been in mentoring roles both as a professional, when I ran the department, the Art Advisory Service at the Museum of Modern Art. People who worked for me, and also the museum had an internship program, a strong internship program. It was very unusual to be running a profit center in the middle of a not-for-profit organization. So that was giving people different heads up in terms of what their goals were. And then I'm currently at New York University running the Visual Arts Administration Master's Program. And not only do we have an internship program that students are required to do at least one, and many do 3, 4, 5. So helping them determine what internships are going to help assist them in achieving their goals long term. And some of those are curatorial, some are not. But also the alums tend to come back and, what should I do about now I'm in this job and I want to go in this direction or that direction. So lots of, as you say, LinkedIn is a great new, it's great to see where they go, and it's great to, have them come back to you, and they're in jobs, they want interns now, but they also want to know what their next step should be, and they continue to touch base, which is very, very nice. I'm also on the Art Table Career Committee, which is a great way to learn about what other, what everybody's doing, and it's we have different panels, and that's been fun to help those women in their various chosen areas. So.
Perfect. So we had a chat last week in which we sort of laid out the parameters of this discussion, and we left that with 5 rather overarching questions and issues that we thought were of concern to everyone. And I'm going to start out with those and ask each of the panelists to address that or talk to each other about it. And then I will ask the people who are listening if they have any specific questions that they want answered. So I'm going to start with an issue that everyone felt was very important about leadership opportunities. How do you assist the mentee to identify leadership opportunities within their own institution or such opportunities at their institution? And then as a question that relates to that, how can they use what they have already achieved? How can they show that to have been something that shows great leadership potential that they have, or that demonstrates their leadership potential? So, Sandra, did you want to start out with that? Leadership opportunities, how do you identify them, and then also how do you use what you've already done to, and how do you portray that as being moving into leadership opportunities?
I think one of the key things, it's so many of us are trained not to toot our own horns. And there are very gracious ways to say, I initiated XYZ. I did this either in your resume or in your interview, to slip it in, this kind of thing. I was a leader in starting the, council on advocacy for the students, or whatever group it is. Tell people what you've done. Don't be afraid to just very nicely, forthrightly come out and say it, I think. We're also very lucky here. We let the students run colloquiums, and several times we've run one in particular, leadership for women in the arts. And just hearing how we had a gallerist from Gagosian Gallery. We had, I think of this one panel in particular, we had a head of a museum, how those people negotiated with their board or identified certain projects that their expertise as curators could bring to the fore, that what they could contribute. The more you give, the more you're going to be recognized. I think those are two things we've been able to do. So.
And Martha?
Well, especially when I'm working with our sort of more junior and mid-level curators here at the Art Institute, because I know the context in which they're working, I do try to help them, even if they're feeling sort of stuck and under-recognized, to think about sort of opportunities in everyday life to demonstrate leadership skills, or even to directly recognize on a daily basis as leadership opportunities really are. And then I think also mentoring each other, curators who make a point of being sounding boards for their colleagues can emerge as leaders amongst themselves and ultimately be seen as really valuable thought leaders within the institution. I think there are administrative leaders, but then there are thought leaders, and I think that one can be a thought leader without necessarily having a big title. So helping your mentees make a list of really practical things on a daily basis where you can demonstrate your leadership skills. And then the second part of that, I guess, is the part about tooting your own horn, which I think is hard for most of us. And I don't even want to make any kind of gender assumptions about that, but I think a lot of us girls were raised that, that it wasn't polite to toot your own horn. And but I think there are lots of really constructive ways that you can do that, even as a very young curator. For example, thank your supervisors and your director for opportunities. And in the course of thanking them, slip in a few details about how successful your project was. Or if you give a paper at an outside conference and you're pretty sure that your director and other members of the administration have no idea that you just had this success, write a little in your own horn. The other thing is that I think it's good to enlist mentors within your own institution who can help you. So, for example, curators at the Art Institute are expected to be very active in development and to forge relationships with collectors and donors. But I think many of the non-department heads find it hard to do that if they're not being given obvious opportunities to get to know trustees and donors. But if one enlists something like, in my case, a deputy director, I'm helping a number of curators with this, to make introductions when you're at a function, to make sure that you're meeting people, that somebody kind of knows that you're trying, but you need a little help. And then the flip side of that is when you do have a good interaction with a donor, you happen to have a lunch or a good visit to their home, or you bump into them somewhere and you find out something about their interests, follow it up with a little email to the head of development and copy it to your deputy director, who might then forward it to the director. But these can be actually really helpful to your administration to know when you have a good contact with somebody. And, if people know that you're trying to work on your development skills and on your visibility with donors, people in administration are usually willing to help you with that because it's an asset to the institution. So those are just a few reflections on that.
I want to come back to an idea that Martha just brought up about thought leaders and administrative leadership, because I find that when I speak to younger colleagues, it's difficult to help them negotiate between the two of those things. How can you cut yourself up so that you're both continuing to be productive and a leader in your field of study and at the same time increase your responsibilities in the institution in which you work or in the institution you hope to work for? This is not an easy balance to reach. Sandra, again, I'm going to ask you to start off here because I think that you're coming from an academic situation and you're sending people off into the world in many, many different capacities. How do they keep doing the things that they're trained to do and at the same time learn to take over increasing responsibility?
It's certainly a challenge. I think, inculcating in them a love of continuing to go after the area that they're researching, continuing, and so much of it my stage really is, giving them that sense that there's a, there's not one answer to what an area that they're researching. There are so many facets that they have to look at, or that they can look at. And so often, in my particular program, they might leave here and think they'll never have that time to research again. And I think we really try and say, you're going to look at these issues, even though you're going to be in a professional capacity, you're going to want to look at these issues and share with them your research or gain other research in a lot of different ways, and your working life will inform that. So I think those are big hurdles, and it's always the how do I have time to do both and to bifurcate myself really. And I think an early sense of buckling down and doing that hard research and not giving over to the nitty-gritty entirely. You just have to carve out the time. It's an early time management lesson. By the same token, there's I think there's a lot of thought that goes into, there's a lot of, you have to be sort of intuitive and sensitive to how you advance administratively also, and that's very tricky in the sense you almost have to spend as much time thinking about the players and the steps you might take, or how you can contribute, how you can move yourself ahead, as you do. It's much more strategic than research. It's a different way of thinking. Like everything else, the more ways of thinking you train people to do, the better. And it's sometimes mentoring is just taking what's already there and getting the person to see it from a different point of view, and take this administrative problem that feels like such a burden, and how can you go at it from a different point of view. I think, I think myself, I've been mentored that way, and so
what kind of training does a mentor need to be able to actually pass on ideas about strategic thinking?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think that different, when you understand how different organizations are structured, or ways that people, the more you know about certain fields, and the more you, I mean, we teach strategic planning here. I don't teach it though, but I went to Columbia Business School actually, as well as having art history undergrad, and I think it's the combination of learning how to think. But I see it in curators and other people who might be totally trained in an art historical manner, but they need to organize it differently and think about how they can bring that to the fore. Or it's almost, sometimes it's intuitive, sometimes it's really laying it out step by step about what your next strategies might be. And it's so that you can figure out how you're going to interact. It's a bigger picture kind of looking at things. And some people are more intuitive at it than others, but it's so often it's there. I mean, it's there in a child. They figure out how to get around the parent, and and it's the same.
How we get around our directors.
Yeah, how do you get around director? How do you get that book catalog approved at the value you want, or the budget you want, and whatever it is. I mean, I think there are lots of different ways to go. So.
Martha, balance, strategy?
Yeah, lots of topics that just have come up in Sandra's very good remarks. I guess going back to the sort of original question about balancing curatorial and scholarly work with trying to build a career strategically, I think we do need to emphasize to our younger colleagues the importance of continuing to build and grow as curators. One of the things I've done with a couple of people that I've been sort of informally mentoring recently is had them read the bios of the fellows at the Center for Curatorial Leadership, because you'll notice that while all of these people may be going on to department head positions or deputy director or director positions eventually, the reason that they were chosen for CCL is entirely based on their laurels as curators up to this point, or almost entirely. The pivotal exhibitions they've organized, the great mentoring programs for training curators they might have established in their museums, but that really have to do with our scholarly and curatorial practice. So I don't think we want to let our mentees get so panicked about advancing administratively, or so fixated on promotions that they forget the just basic groundwork of doing great research and thinking up innovative, original topics for exhibitions. And the other part about that, I guess, is that I think some of us at least were trained how important it is to travel. And I think because a lot of younger curators now are growing up in budget-strapped museums, they may be, and I don't know this, I only know this anecdotally, skimping on the travel a bit, so that when they're working on their checklists for exhibitions, they may do a lot of that work from the internet now. And obviously that's a time saver and a convenience. But when you think about, the rigor of actually going to different museums around the world or wherever you need to go, meeting other colleagues, having to argue your case for loans, and then just spending a lot of time looking. Mm-hmm. I'm afraid that some of our younger colleagues may not be really steeped in that kind of rigor, and also that kind of networking that comes from travel. So, as resources are available, I think we want to urge younger curators to try to do that travel, do the legwork, find ways to use courier trips or attach a trip to a vacation, be creative and scrappy about how you get yourself places. But and obviously participating in conferences where you may be paid to participate, or giving lectures at other museums. All of those are great networking opportunities, but even more so a great chance to look at collections and educate your eye. And one of the things that museum directors are really complaining about right now is that they can't find enough young curators who have trained eyes, who can go to Maastricht or go to the print fair in New York and make sound acquisition decisions, because they simply haven't had the experience looking and getting to know other collections besides their own. So I think, one big point is, yes, the balance is super important, and before you can rest on your laurels and go on to sort of bigger, job titles, you need to have that groundwork where you're a respected curator and scholar. Mm-hmm. And then I guess on top of that, I would just say that I've kind of lost the thread here. What else were we?
Well, Sandra did a very thought-provoking thing about thinking strategically, and how it's not necessary that in the curator's brain there's at the same time the wonderful commitment to the work itself, and an ability to step back and look at the larger picture of their own career or their role in their institution, and how to think strategically about what's going to happen over the next years. So that was the follow-up.
I think that's a kind of a huge gift that a mentor can give a mentee, mm-hmm. is the space and kind of safe space to step back and identify one's own strengths and weaknesses, to be self-reflective, and then apply that to the situation in which one finds oneself. So if one is unhappy in one's current job situation, or feeling stuck or at a crossroads, how are you contributing to that situation yourself? What would be your biggest goals? What would be some sub-objectives of your big picture goal? Mm-hmm. And then maybe the biggest gift of all, at least for those of us who are just so busy, and that seems to be all of us right now, we're juggling so much, is to make a checklist of doable things you can actually accomplish that will add up to something meaningful. Because I think it's very easy when you're pulled in a million directions to lose sight of what you need to do for yourself. But if you have a kind of checklist of doable things where you could try to get 3 of them done in a week, or 2 done in a month, whatever they might be, one may find oneself in a better situation 6 months forward, getting into better habits, speaking up for oneself more, whatever the issues are. So I think, you know, both helping mentees do that self-reflection, which is sometimes hard to make space for, and then extrapolate that into really practical goals.
Yeah. The final thing that I wanted to bring up, and then I'll open this up to our listeners for their own questions. I know that the work that's going on between the AAMC mentors and mentees this year has a defined period and structure, and people are being asked to speak or meet a certain number of times. But I've actually seen that the greatest mentoring, in a way, takes place after the predetermined time is over, when you actually can stick with someone and help them move on. It's difficult and it's a challenge, but when I look around at my successful colleagues, I mostly see that they have mentors that stuck with them for, in fact, a long time. How do you do that? How do we build that into the system? This part of this is very personal. Of course, you have to really believe in someone to continue to mentor them over the years, but I'm sure both of you have done that. And how have you made that work for you? Martha, do you want to start this time?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, for the legions of interns I've worked with, LinkedIn has worked pretty well. I also tend to try to let students that I've been particularly close to over the years know when I'm going to be in town. So if I'm speaking at CIA or doing a session, you know, I may fire off a bunch of emails and just say, come to my session, it would be great to chat afterwards, that kind of thing. I think having been mentored as part of CCL, what happened in my mentoring situation is that the year of formal, or the 6 months of formal mentoring, has now morphed more into kind of a collegial friendship where, you know, we run into each other at conferences, at events, usually try to make a point of going off in a corner and catching up a bit, asking how things are going, that kind of thing, but it's no longer the formal sort of phone call every 2 weeks, setting objectives. It's morphed into more of a relationship where I feel like I could pick up the phone if I needed advice, but you know, just in the meantime, just knowing that it's a relationship worth cultivating, so it's there if you need it, but maybe, you know, letting it fall into sort of less formal lines.
Sandra?
Yes, I agree with that. I always say to the people I'm mentoring, I want to hear what, you know, it's a trust issue, actually. You hear as much what is working for you as what doesn't, because you don't say this necessarily, but you, in a way, if you're vested in them, you want to hear about the whole picture. And you know, I always say, if you don't tell me what happened when you applied for this internship or you spoke with this person, how am I going to know what, you know, what, like this, what we should strategize next? You know, I'm here with you all the way, and it's a hard thing to get people to trust you enough to tell you about the time something didn't happen for them or whatever. But it's so much a part of it. Sometimes I have to run into them and they don't come back to me, and you know, somewhere, and sometimes they will. It's you know, building up, and as you say, I think it's so true. Ultimately, they become sort of young colleagues, and then, you know, part of your life when you're out there in the world, whether it's at speaking or they see something that you're doing and you see the things they're doing and you go to that.
Right.
So it's it becomes a longer term relationship.
All right, we'd like to hear from the people who are out there. If you would type in a question or two, I will relay them to our panelists. Who wants to start off? I don't see anything in my question box. Should I? Judith, you'll let me know if there's something up there that I'm not seeing. Okay, all right, wait a minute. Here we go. Now I'm seeing them. Hold on 1 minute. I'm just going to scroll back to the top. Okay. How can the panelists hear me? How can younger curators break into areas that don't seem to be open to them? For example, some organizations, conferences, etc., are led by the same people year after year, and younger colleagues seem stymied by this. Advice? Martha, you want to start?
That's a good question. I guess I'm not as familiar with that situation because I was extraordinarily lucky to be in a field that seems to be very open and nurturing towards younger scholars, namely the print and drawing world. And the Print Council of America is really just a group of friends more than anything. But it is true that if you go to CAA and other conferences like that, one does, notice that it's the same stars who are commanding the ballrooms every year. And I think one way to break into something like CAA is to think about joining some of the affiliate groups. Many of our fields have affiliate groups with CAA, and they're usually smaller sessions, and usually the heads of those groups are pretty approachable in advance of the sessions. There usually is a general call for papers that's limited to the members of that particular professional organization. So I think that that can be one way. I also wonder whether AAMC could help with that, perhaps by trying to have more regular sessions run by AAMC at some of the bigger conferences in which we particularly target younger curators. So
I think that's a very good idea.
Maybe that the solution's not entirely out there yet, but that we could crack that nut if we put our minds to it.
Sandra, did you have thoughts about that?
I don't know this area as specifically. It always seems to be a catch-22. You say, write in an area that which you're researching in and interest, but the big guns tend to control things. But I know in independent curating, that's how people pop up in terms of what shows that they've been able to do in sort of more outside of the norm venues, that kind of thing, and then they get noticed and then they grow. So and I'll sometimes get taken into institutions, but it's not the traditional path. So
I guess I could add one thing, and that is I think it's great when you're a younger curator scholar to volunteer for things. That some of your senior superstar colleagues may not want to take on. So, my very wonderful lifelong involvement with the Print Council of America started by being an editor on the newsletter, and then, being willing to organize this or that, and eventually serving as a vice president and then president. But that was a case of sort of, just being willing to help out at the beginning, and then you get to know people who see something in you. Your network expands, more people can speak up for you or turn opportunities in your direction. So, kind of jumping onto a team can be a really good way to get things started.
Absolutely. Also, I see in the independent world, sometimes, younger curators are asked to do exhibitions, even in galleries. I know that this line between the for-profit and not-for-profit is sort of, well, it's graying actually, but nevertheless, it's sort of, they're on their own then, and you get to see them in a certain light, and that's, I don't know if that's always allowable within one's own institution, or if it will bring that much to the career. What do you think?
And maybe also this issue is linked with something that we started off with at the very beginning, which is learning how to not blow your own horn, but to bring your achievements to other people's attention, so that in fact those people who are in those ballrooms and running the things actually have become aware of your work and what you're doing on a certain subject, and having the bravery to reach out to them when you've done a good piece of work and feel it should be brought to their attention, and so linking those two things together. And perhaps a mentor is somebody who can stand behind you and give you a little push to do that, and actually make you feel the confidence to do that as well. Okay, another one, not dissimilar. Many curatorial jobs seem to be not to be posted these days, and interviews are being given by referrals. How can younger colleagues find out about positions and apply when the system seems closed to them? And this is, I think, an unfortunate truth that many positions in the end are people find out about them by word of mouth rather than being openly posted, or when they are openly posted, there's something not quite real about that posting. Actually, I think this is a tough question for a mentor. Sandra?
You know, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's you know, often if you know people, I help people to contact other people in organizations who then can get them in the door, that kind of thing. But you don't know everybody, and you don't know all the players, and it's so often you learn about these jobs late. But you know, again, in the profession, when you go to hear people speak, older curators and so forth, and people. Networking is such a big, important part, although it's more time-consuming, because you get to know people in the field, and very often they then can give you a step up to get your foot in, to get, you know, hey, right here, send this in here, whatever. It's you know, people come to me and say, I really want to go after this job at XYZ organization, and unless, you know, I certainly don't have the you might know somebody who does. I guess that's what, you know, informational interviews, all these kinds of things are ways you can go. Martha? I don't know.
Martha?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a tough, it's a tough situation. And even when, I mean, here at the Art Institute, we always post curatorial positions, but it's perfectly true that, you know, the known candidate probably has the advantage. And so I think this is one wonderful way that mentors can get involved, is to help their mentees brainstorm about different angles in which to situate themselves well in a certain job hunt. And that may be, you know, brainstorming about who they know in common, who might be able to forward a resume with a good word. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I think mentors can also just stress the absolute importance, whether you like it or not in our field, of learning to network at a very high level. You know, some of us would prefer to think that everything can be done, you know, on the merits of our own wonderful personalities and skills, but the reality is I don't know that there is a more highly networked field than the art world. And so learning to get into really good habits, you know, writing follow-up emails when you meet someone in passing, you know, asking for a referral to somebody from somebody else you think might know them, keeping in touch with your faculty advisors and your former employers so that they always have a fresh copy of your resume on their desks in case something comes to their attention. Learning how to ask for an informational interview, which can get you in the door with somebody you may not know, but once you're in, it gives you a chance to hand them your resume and impress them with your seriousness. All of these little skills, if practiced on a regular basis over the course of a year, can put you in a better position when a job actually comes along.
Yes, I mean, all three of us are in a really fortunate situation that we work at institutions that people are visiting all the time. So people stop into our offices, we run into people in the neighborhood, coffee shops and so on. But of course there are many places that you can work where that is not going to be the case. And therefore a very proactive regimen is important to say to yourself, right, I've got to get to Chicago this year and go and speak to Martha. I haven't spoken to her in 3 years. I've got to do it. That kind of thing. I think it's exactly it's the best way, and I think it's true that mentors can continue to help you have the energy to do that, even when there doesn't seem to be any immediate payoff.
Right, and I think especially with people who are new to the field, instilling in them an understanding of how important that is critical. So, for example, we have a brand new Mellon-funded program here at the Art Institute that is intended to eventually help diversify the pipeline into curatorial work in the United States. And one of the first things we did with these undergraduates who convened here this summer for an intensive summer academy was give them the 3-page list of names and emails of everyone they would meet in the course of the week. And we said, when you go back to your dorm at night, shoot everybody you met that day an email and tell them what you liked about the conversation and follow up in any way that seems meaningful to you. But get in the habit of doing that. And that was part of their homework, was to do that.
That's a really great idea.
Good advice. Very good advice. Okay, somebody wanted to go back to the issue of traveling, looking and traveling. And I couldn't agree more with what Martha said about that. I think it is the bedrock of our field, and people absolutely need to be able to look at works of art in the original as often as possible, in as many places as possible. Again, I've worked from such a privileged place in this regard. The Met has always had money for curatorial travel, but I well know that many of my colleagues, many people I've worked with on exhibitions are not in the same position. How do you convince? How can you convince a museum that they must invest in this in order to become leaders in their own areas? And how can a mentor give a mentee ammunition to go to an administration about this? No one wants to answer this one. Martha,
I'm sort of coming from the same angle you are, Andrea, which is that I've grown up in this institution, and while the funds aren't running like a river around here, between courier trips and grants and building travel into exhibition budgets and that sort of thing, I've managed to do the travel I needed. But I think sometimes we have to look outside of our institutions, and there are opportunities to apply for travel grants for curators. And at the moment I can't think of what they are, but there are various kinds of small opportunities that might let you travel for a week in the summer, or or go one particular place to be in residence for a few weeks. So I think one needs to get really good at researching opportunities. And I think, again, I use the word scrappy. I think all of us here feel like we're very scrappy in the way we piece together trips. Ask to whether some institution would like to have you give a lecture while you're headed their way, or drive someplace instead of fly there. I think it depends entirely on the kind of travel we're talking about, but I think one needs to begin with the commitment that it is really important for self development. And then I think one needs to be really adamant with administration, but in a really targeted way. In other words, I think it really helps to have a travel plan, exactly what you're going to do in each place, exactly how much each place will cost, what can be accomplished, who can you meet with while you're there, what's the likelihood of getting a loan if you don't travel there. I mean, build a case. I think that's what it takes. And if you have a good case for pros and cons, I have to, hope and trust that the situation gradually improves, and you help to educate your administration about why you feel particular trips are so important.
I can't think but what I know actually that universities are not unlike museums in this score, and that last year I got invited to go to China just for 3 days, and I thought, this is ridiculous, I can't go to China for 3 days. But having that stepping stone, I went to my university and said, okay, I'm going to be in Beijing for 3 days, but NYU has a Shanghai office. Can I go there and do something for you? As you say, building, you're going to do a lecture here, so can I do this for you here, and putting it all together. And it will be valuable because so many of our students coming into the program are from China, and so convincing all the players. And of course there are those, and I think this is what you were referring to, Martha, not only country consulates that have funds. I know it's not the Asia Society, but the Asian Cultural Council, I think it is. All these countries, Germany has a fund for people to travel with.
Yeah.
All these countries have resources that they're looking to spend in ways that make exchange and mutual interest work. So it's good to check with, start with the consulates of these various countries. France, they have monies in areas that you don't often think they would, and it's a great way to fuel your travel and fuel doing something for them that's something for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Consulates are a very good point, because they may not have the funds themselves, but they know which grant programs exist for different levels of students and professionals. A couple of other ideas that come to mind. For those of our colleagues who may be working in university art museums, one can always try the angle of accomplishing some alumni function while you're traveling, so that you're doing something of value for your university. And then the other possibility is donor travel. So we've had a number of really expensive trips funded by donors who wanted to have the experience of traveling somewhere sort of challenging with a particular curator. So we had a curator who was able to do an extensive trip to Morocco by taking a couple who was interested in that part of the world with her, and they did, all kinds of cultural stops. She introduced them to the country, and then she was able to build in a number of days for research on top of that. So, sometimes, particularly once you begin to have relationships of your own with donors, one can finesse donor travel that can be useful.
And I'll add to that at the Met, there are trips that are organized with our volunteers, and so many museums have volunteer organizations now, docent organizations, and they are, at least here certainly, they seem to be very happy to help underwrite a curator's travel if it is going to be continued training for them, so that when they come back they are better equipped to do their job as docents. And that perhaps is another way with donors or with volunteer docents too. Somebody asking us to address the question of how mentors can help people in the disciplines and in the areas that are not so high profile. So the decorative arts, photographs, all those areas that maybe directors are not paying as much attention to, and or, instead focusing their efforts on the paintings curator or the sculpture curators or whatever. Do we have any words of advice for mentors about that issue?
Yeah, I can think of a few things. Maybe principally for curators in those maybe less trodden areas, to form a real alliance with your educators and interpretive staff can be really important, because when you work collaboratively with those parts of the staff that are most engaged with the public, you can learn from them as well as you can inform them how to make your area more popular, more appealing, more engaging for general audiences or even family audiences. But sometimes, it takes a collaborative effort to think about how to make a particularly specialized area of decorative arts accessible to our audiences. And I think alliances with education and interpretive staff, so that you begin to figure out, how to position your particular medium, let's say, in a way that will be seen differently by the director, by the membership staff. Once one shows that one can do a really successful program, let's say for a general audience, then you begin to gain some ground. We have an example here where we have a Mellon postdoctoral fellow who is an arms and armor specialist, who has designed a special cart from which he teaches in the gallery, and he has had he's either bought or had fabricated pieces of armor that the public can actually wear in the galleries while he's giving a presentation. And he's caused such a sensation and been so successful in helping people visualize what a joust was like, or how exciting it was to hear, the clanking of armor in battle, or how really light a lot of the armor was when you're inside of it, and how flexible it was, contrary to public opinion. He's taken an area that had been sort of tucked away in our collection and made it now one of the darlings of our education staff. So that would be one advice I would give, is come at it from the standpoint of how do you engage the public in your field.
Great. I see that we have two minutes left. So I have a couple more questions, but I'll ask the last one that's on my screen, which is also an interesting one, slightly different from what we've been thinking about, which is helping people who may not yet have entirely decided which field they should go into, and how they can look out over the next 5-10 years of what's going on in the museum world to help them make that big decision.
Sandra,
usually a graduate student situation, but I can imagine being a young person in a museum where they've had to be sort of a generalist, trying to get into a more specialized area. Sandra?
Well, I think in many ways, interning in various departments, even at a lower capacity, gives you a viewpoint to see if you really want to be in that area, because you get a taste of what you're thinking about, and whether you want to continue on in that particular field or a different field of what role you would have in a given area. So that's a really key.
So trying various things through internships or through contractual work.
Yes.
And then, I think eventually you have to sit down and also kind of make a list of your skills and your aptitudes, and again, this is a place for self-reflection. What am I good at? What kind of work do I have patience for? What don't I have patience for? Do I like this kind of collaboration versus that kind of collaboration? One important consideration is language skills. What languages do I have, and am I well suited for the career I'm going into? If I really hate medieval Latin or, you know, medieval German, then I probably shouldn't go into, you know, medieval European art. So sometimes, you know, understanding what your skill set is and where you're best equipped to be successful is interesting. And then, you know, there are the really intellectual sides of the question. You know, are you interested in issues of multiples and audience, in which case photography and prints and drawings, you know, are endlessly fascinating? Or, you know, are you much more interested in the unique object, the precious object, the object that, you know, was collected in a widespread way versus objects, you know, that are being created today for a tiny exclusive collector clientele? You know, sometimes there are ideological / ethical / academic interests that all play together to help point in a particular direction.
That's great. It's 3:30 and we've been at it for an hour. I want to thank our panelists. If either of them have a closing remark they want to make, it would be great. But otherwise, we thank all of you for listening and for sending in your questions, and we hope you have a great year of mentors and mentees together working. It's a wonderful new program, and I hope everyone is getting a lot out of it. Judith, did you want us to sign off in any particular way?